Welcome, everyone. It is Wednesday, and you are watching Direct Line. Where in the world is Mark Unkerher? We don't know. I am hosting, filling in for Mark, producer extraordinaire, and my co-host is Jackie Saxon, the hostess with the most. And our special guest today is Neil Parrott, the next congressman from Maryland's 6th District. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Are we allowed to say that when we haven't endorsed yet as a club? Or you can shut down?
Nah. Our bylaws say we're allowed to endorse.
I guess this counts then.
No, it's not really an endorsement. It's just me saying the next. And it's stuff. I said that to. No, actually, no. I have not been hosting.
You definitely have not said that yet this cycle. But welcome back to the show.
Great to be here. I tell you, I like the introduction, the shots from Maryland. I'm an engineer, and I especially appreciated the shots of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge.
Yeah.
Think of the American Legion Bridge. It's too bad Hogan couldn't do another term so that we could have had that built. Widened.
Or lanes 127 or hot lanes 1270.
Exactly.
I mean, you traveled that route for how many years? You were in the State House, and you probably went home on Fridays that way. And
I would. Sometimes I would take the ICC and take 270 up to 70. Yes.
And that bottleneck in Frederick, where 270 and 70 meet, that is a nightmare.
It is. And, there was a project the state highway had. It's called Phase 4 of the I-70 project. They never built it. And under Hogan, we did work with him, and they added Phase 4 to the I-270 project, the widening project. So had that been built, and we were so close. I mean, so close. Within a month, if Hogan's firm had gone 1 month more, that road would be built.
Maybe you and Senator Hogan can bring some transportation federal dollars to get that done.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Do that.
And I mean, let's just stay on the topic of transportation for a minute. I mean, I'm very familiar with your district. 270 is a mess. Many times, I do go to Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I take Route 15. One thing. The best part of taking Route 15 is crossing over into Pennsylvania. You know why? Pennsylvania's got a dual-lane highway on Route 15. While in Maryland, we've got traffic lights, a 2-lane highway, crossings. We've had so many accidents on Route 15 right outside of Frederick. Last summer we had that oil tanker that burned right before Frederick on Route 15.
Mm-hmm.
And many times on my trips up and down from Mechanicsburg, there's always an accident at that interchange. And I think one of the things if we could do is stop the whole process, and take 270, elevate it. You can build interchange. There's a lot of land out there on Route 15. You know that, right?
There is.
There's a lot of land you can build. They did that to Interstate 68 years ago. It used to be Route 40, and now it's a dual-lane interstate, and it's just a great way to get to Western Maryland, by the way.
There are a lot of north-south routes that really need to be improved. You just hit one, I-270 and US 15. Then you've got in Washington County, I-81. And then up in Allegheny County, Maryland 216. They've widened part of the Maryland part, but the Pennsylvania part's really narrow. And they need to widen that so it's a connecting between the two interstates there. If we had those three going, that would really improve transportation in the area and allow us to have more development. Businesses could be served, and of course, it would be safer.
And I know years ago there was a lot of talk about transportation bypasses. Probably when George Allen was governor of Virginia, and we had some lunatic here in Maryland that was governor. Ferris Clendenning, I think. It was William Donald Schaefer, who wasn't that bad. He was on his way out, but they were talking about taking 95, all the traffic off 95, bypassing the east and west bypass, thereby taking that out-of-state traffic off of 495, and that just kind of died on the vine, so to speak. And I know you're a transportation engineer. As an engineer, is that a feasible option, or is that just people saying stuff to make them feel better by the bypassing of the beltways?
Well, they had talked about that, like Route 301 going up through Charles County. That could be a bypass around I-95. They talked about a couple other ways. And then the fact is, north-south gets a ton of traffic through Maryland, and we need to serve it better. I think for me, the big focus would be I-270. It just has to be widened. Once we widen I-270, widen part of the Beltway, really just tie into what Virginia's already done with toll lanes, express toll lanes. If we had that in Maryland, that would be huge. And it wouldn't be paid for out of tax dollars. It would only be paid for by the people who are actually paying the tolls. And so you'd have toll lanes and free lanes. So anybody who want to pay the tolls, they still have better flow than they would today. Governor Ehrlich, he did a great job. That's how we got the ICC built. They already started these express toll lanes in the Baltimore area. And unfortunately, we just didn't get 270 during the Ehrlich administration, and then we didn't quite get it in the Hogan. So we're going to need another shot to get that one. And you're right. We might have to use federal dollars to try and help make this happen. And as an incentive for Maryland to actually start doing the right thing instead of spending all this money on light rail projects, which, what a disaster. We're seeing cost overrun for that Purple Line.
Yeah, and you and I both have read the Reason Foundation's book, The Road More Traveled, and they did Houston, Texas. They've got rings of beltways around Houston. Houston, Texas. They put miles of roads down. They do service roads next to the beltway, which also expedites traffic in times of accidents and so on. But I think the DMV, they're so focused on mass transit, they kind of lose sight of, hey, let's build some more roads.
Well, Pete Buttigieg has been lost in action for several months now. I have not heard his name, I think, since the train derailment in Ohio.
What about the one in Pennsylvania? He hasn't said much about the one that happened last week or a week before last.
Well, and there was that one last year where the road literally collapsed in on itself. I think they're just hiding him.
Maybe he just needs to be hidden because he's not doing a great job. He's doing a terrible job. When he was first in office, he went on paternity leave. And at the same time, we couldn't even get shipments from China. There's this whole backup of freight.
Yeah.
Somebody as a leader. Biden wasn't a leader. Buttigieg was absent. Nobody led, and it was awful.
And I tell you, when I was flying to Florida, and they go over the water, and when you get around Norfolk, you see all these shipping containers just sitting out at sea. You see that in Savannah, and it's just, there was a lot of ships. It was like a traffic jam on the Beltway. That's how many ships you had, cargo ships you had out there just waiting to get in. And I know we had the same problem on the West Coast with the port strike in California. And that's one thing I think that is very amongst, a lot of people kind of, even a lot of Republicans, they don't really focus on the transportation issue, but the transportation issue is actually a really big deal. Most people, they want to go for, the glitzy stuff like tax cuts and stuff like that, which is great. I'm all for tax cuts. But, let's also think about transportation, because transportation is a mess. Our infrastructure has not been updated in years because the enviros, like in Montgomery County, I don't know if you noticed, Neil, that they've gotten on Old Georgetown Road, they got rid of an entire car lane for bicycles.
Okay, before we let Dwight go off on a whole tangent about bicycle lanes, because he could do that for an hour, let's take that tangent on transportation, though, and shift it to the environment and energy, because one of the unique parts of Western Maryland, and particularly in Garrett and Allegheny counties, is it's rife for bringing the energy sector there, something that I know Trump is very interested in unlocking U.S. energy. So as a member of Congress, what would you do to really open up that economic opportunity and energy opportunity in Western Maryland?
Well, Jack, you've really hit on something. There are so many natural resources in Western Maryland, and obviously we have natural gas reserves that we could tap into. We also have a lot of woods with a lot of trees that we could tap into. And a lot of these things are just completely restricted by the state of Maryland. They won't let us, it's the Marcellus Shale is where we could go in. People would be getting rich. Instead, people are getting rich in West Virginia and Pennsylvania with no one benefiting in Maryland. It's just from our own laws. So in Congress, I'd like to see us try and open that up to make sure that nationwide, there's an opportunity for people to be able to get into the Marcellus Shale and other things. We need to be energy independent. That's going to bring the cost down for natural gas, for regular gas. But, Maryland, we have a problem. And that is the state of Maryland, the legislators, they're controlled by, it's a supermajority Democrat. And a lot of them are really extremist Democrats who won't allow Western Maryland to do what they want to do, which the legislators there, they'd like to see us be able to go and have an economic boom, looking at Marcellus Shale and some of these other things. But the Democrats there have really shut it down, and that's a real shame for the state of Maryland.
And not only that, towns like Cumberland, Frostburg, they're small towns, right? Western Maryland, unemployment is 3%. 3%, hey, that's not a big number. When you take a size like Cumberland and 3% of the population there is unemployed, that's actually fairly significant for the people who live there. And I think fracking would bring well-paid jobs to Western Maryland, towns like Cumberland, Flintstone, and so on, parts of that area, they'd be creating jobs. It would be an economic boom for the Western Maryland. They'd see so much growth there since the westward movement back at the Cumberland Gap. That's how big it'd be.
Yeah. And obviously the other hot topic that people care about the most right now, and we're seeing that in every poll coming out of every exit poll, everything voters care about, really goes back to the border. And because tied to the border is crime, is economics, is pretty much everything goes to the border. So with the kind of inaction, particularly with the bipartisan bill that recently got shot down in Congress, what would you do in that situation to rally the members of Congress, both on our side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle, to get not just any bill passed, but a bill passed that actually makes sense and actually closes the border?
Well, it's interesting. There are different approaches to that. I was just listening to a speech tonight by Congressman Chip Roy, and he was just insisting that we should stop all funding, that they control the purse strings, and until Biden actually enforces the border, which is his job, that we shouldn't be having any more spending. I tend to agree with that. We don't need a bill to close the border. It was closed under Trump. We were doing a great job. And then Biden just reversed a lot of the Trump policies, the return to Mexico policy, many other policies. He shut down construction of the border wall and actually started selling off the parts. Completely going in the backwards direction. He's also using our border control agents. Instead of trying to keep the border secure, he's actually escorting people across the border, trying to cut through fences that Governor Abbott in Texas has put up. Totally the wrong approach. We need to have someone that actually is going to enforce the border. That bill allowed for 5,000 illegal aliens to cross every single day. That was legal as part of the bill. That's inexcusable. No, I don't see how they even thought that would have any muster to pass at all. And I'm glad it's not going to. That's sickening. That's an insult. We shouldn't have anyone legally crossing who's an illegal alien. Only those who have gone through the hard process of being able to come in here legally, those are the people. We want them. We want them in our country, but not the illegal aliens. And 5,000 a day, give me a break.
Yeah, and that's the big problem is, and because I'll say, because of the efforts of Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis shifting, basically giving the illegals, asking them, hey, would you like to go to New York? Would you like to go to Chicago? And putting them on a bus and sending them there has kind of brought that issue, because if you going back, because the border issue has been an issue since the 92 presidential election. If you recall, Pat Buchanan in 92 was sounding the alarm bells, and back then, in Maryland, it wasn't an issue. We didn't see the legal issues that we're seeing today in Maryland. We didn't see, this fentanyl crisis during in the 90s, in the early 90s, when Pat Buchanan, a lot of people branded Pat Buchanan as a racist because he wanted to shut the border down, and was Pat Buchanan. I think Pat Buchanan was a prophet of what was to come. He had the foresight in 1992. He saw this coming,
So with that bill, obviously there were a lot of bad parts to it, one being the 5,000 people crossing per day. The other part of it is that it was tied to funding for Ukraine, for Israel, with everything going on there, and I believe it was Gaza aid as well. So what is your stance on each of those things? Obviously, I think we can all agree that they should all be separate votes. But where do you stand on each of those wars going on overseas?
Well, I think let's look big picture first. And we were talking about illegal aliens. Democrats in the past have done a great job enforcing our border. I don't know why they abandoned that issue and said, we're not going to even care about that anymore. I'm inviting people almost to come across. And it's interesting, all these places that used to brag and say, all are welcome here, meaning illegal aliens, they can come here. Well, the second they sent them to Martha's Vineyard, all those signs stayed up, but they got rid of those illegal aliens. It didn't even take 24 hours, but they were off of Martha's Vineyard. You know, a lot of these places like New York and Chicago, like you mentioned, they all are welcome here. Well, not now. Now they see how much it costs them. And it used to only be those border states that had to face all the problems and then the cost associated with illegal aliens coming over. But now that we're seeing it all across the country in these big cities, a lot of Democrat leaders are saying, wait a minute, this is not working. But that message still isn't getting to President Biden. So now to your next question, internationally, we were doing a great job as a country under President Trump. We were strong. The whole world reviewed us as strong. President Biden came in and he came up with an arbitrary date. He said, by this date, I'm getting everybody out of Afghanistan. And by golly, he got everybody out of Afghanistan. Well, except for a few U.S. citizens who might still be there and a bunch of our allies who are there and billions of dollars worth of equipment, which who knows where that is now. Some terrorist hands have it. It was a disaster. The whole world saw that Biden is weak. The United States is weak. That allowed for an opportunity for Russia to go in to the Ukraine. Had we had President Trump, I don't believe that would have ever happened. That wouldn't even be a war. So that's one reason that's happened. And of course, because the world sees us as weak, the Gazans, the Hamas went over into Israel unprovoked, terrible assault on innocent lives that, again, that should have never, ever happened. It wouldn't, I don't believe, have happened under Trump. And if you look back under Trump, they had these negotiations with other, like Yemen. I never thought we'd have an agreement with Israel and Yemen and the United States, but we did because they were all working together. They feared the United States at the time. No longer are they fearing us at all. We need new leadership. We need to have someone who comes in. America's got to be strong, you know, talk softly and carry a big stick, or peace through strength. Those two things have been in our history. So specifically in the Ukraine, you know, there's a big history there. Should we be there or not? You know, under Clinton, we said that if they got rid of their nuclear weapons, we would help them. Of course, Obama abandoned that when Russia just went in and took over Crimea. And now we're stuck with a big problem. Bottom line is we need some leadership. We shouldn't be sending a whole lot more aid over there. We know we shouldn't be funding their pensions. That's ridiculous. We need a strong leader who says, you guys need to sit down and end this thing right now and come up with some real benefits for both sides and get this war done. I think both sides are tired of it and would like to see it end, but the United States is not helping in any way, actually just making the war continue longer. In Israel, we need to support Israel. Just bottom line, we need to help them. It's the only shining democracy in the whole area. We need to keep that going. So thankful that they're there and for the good that they have around the world and especially in that area. So we have to continue there. Now, there is a problem on the Gaza Strip. Over 80% of the people have been relocated from their houses. So where do they go? I think those are some answers that need to happen. But just sending them food aid, which they don't really need, while they still have U.S. citizens being held, how is that helpful? Well, they need to release our hostages. They need to release Israeli hostages, and then we should talk, and then talk about where they're going to go or settle so that we can do that. But until we have the hostages back, I mean,
you know, and you know, they talk about where the people are going to go, but if you recall, going back to Camp David, Sinai was a thriving community of Israelis living on Sinai, and they were all systematically moved out. The West Bank, people left, were moved out during Bibi's first term. And it's, you know, here's the sad thing is the modern Democratic Party today is basically giving aid and comfort to anti-Semitism in America, frankly. AOC, who goes around, you know, screaming at the top of her lungs about how it's genocide. You know, AOC, how about you take a little history lesson? How about you go to the Middle East and actually see what what's actually going on and read about what happened? It was not the Israelis were just not doing anything, and they were systematic. They were attacked in a naked act of aggression by the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, whoever you want to call them. Because frankly, you know, I know a lot of people like to split hairs. Say, oh, it's the Palestinians aren't the bad guys. It's just no. You know, I don't think so. It's all about the same.
Well, the Palestinians voted for Hamas
Exactly.
leadership, and they would probably do it again.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Germans in World War II. They voted for the Nazi Party to get there, and it's not our fault. Well, you guys voted for the Nazis, frankly.
Well, yeah. So, getting back to, oh gosh, where was I going with this? Well, yeah.
Why you got that? I've got so Neil.
Yes, it quite fully derailed my thought.
Yeah. As a what would be some of your legislative priorities once you get to Washington? What would your top 3 priorities?
Well, one thing we have to do is balance the budget. I've said both sides have been at fault at different times, but we need to balance the budget. H. Ross Perot, he came as an independent. That was his only issue on that issue. So that's going to be important. We have to have a solid dollar. Again, going back to Biden just being a weak president who's letting things happen that hurt our country. These BRIC nations, they're trying to move away from the dollar. He should have been negotiating and saying, hey, let's try and keep the dollar as the international currency. And yet he doesn't even seem to care. He doesn't even seem to understand that's going to affect interest rates. We're going to pay more for loans that we have as a country that we're taking right now. So that's a big problem for us. We need to balance the budget. We need to start being fiscally responsible. Now, I know there are a lot of facets to that. How do we balance this budget? What gets cut? What doesn't? But if we start with the principle, we want to balance the budget, then we can start looking at it and make some hard decisions so we can get going in that right direction.
So I know one of the big questions that people had up until the filing deadline, because there was a lot of bated breath, is Neil going to get in? Is Neil not going to get in? So what ultimately made you decide that you wanted to run again?
Oh, Jackie, that's a great question. Let me tell you what, last time we ran a really, really hard race. I mean, we ran hard until November, kind of took it out of us a little bit. Not just me. I've heard a lot of my supporters who have said, hey, we have basically CD6 fatigue. We're tired to do this. And I felt it as well. So it was really nice for me, honestly, to take a year off and go back and just do civil engineering work and just think about, I even fixed a lot of my computers and upgraded them like you did. You actually showed a picture of that. The CPUs new and things, but we prayed about it a lot. And over the summer, I was thinking, should I join now? And I really felt like I needed to wait. That was the answer. You just have to wait. And so we waited. And then towards the end, that deadline was coming up. I talked to Governor Ehrlich and he gave me some suggestions. He said, Neil, you need to do a serious poll. Don't skip on the poll. Get really good information, find out what's really happening. So we did the poll. He said, you need to talk to other people, see what their opinions are. So we talked to a bunch of people and you need to go talk to the NRCC. And we went and talked to them. It's interesting with Kevin McCarthy there. I don't know that he was going to support someone who's a little more conservative than he was, but with Mike Johnson there, I think we're going to be just fine. We're just going to need to prove to him that it's competitive, which it is, prove that, and then we're going to be able to get some more funding like we didn't get in the last election. There were a lot of things at the very end that really encouraged us to pull the trigger. One thing too, I looked at the data. If I did not join the race, I could be wrong, but the way the data showed, if I didn't join the race, I believe that Dan Cox would have won the primaries. And if he won the primaries, looking at the data, I just didn't see any path for him to win in November. And that was just really unacceptable to me. We've invested so much into this district. I've competed for it. This will be my 3rd time. We took them to court, say the state of Maryland to court, over gerrymandered maps, which was just really awful. We would probably have an 8-0 delegation now. Andy Harris could have lost on the Eastern Shore with that map that the Democrats and the legislature put forward, but we won. Judicial Watch helped me. And District 6, where I'm running, is only a D+2. It's a very, very competitive district. Thankfully, David Trone is not running for Congress again. He's running for U.S. Senate. He's taken his money. He spent $23.5 million so far running for U.S. Senate as of December 31st. It doesn't surprise me. He spent $13 million to beat me in the last election, and we had $1.1 million. So it's going to be much more even-handed this time. I believe we're going to get national support. And I had already made the decision to go for it, to run, but it wasn't long. It was about an hour later. I really made the decision on the last day, but about an hour later, the news broke that Governor Hogan was running for U.S. Senate. And let me tell you, I'm very, very, very encouraged by that, because what that means is if he wins the primaries, we're going to have national money coming into the state of Maryland that we have not seen in a very, very, very long time. We're going to have lots of money coming in here and shining forth conservative values or common sense values, if you will. And then the NRCC will look at this and say, well, now the NRSC is already here. We could put some money here and try and win a few races or just one race here in Maryland. So I think it's all coming together. This coming November, I'm expecting to see diehard, like very conservative Republicans showing up in huge numbers because of Donald Trump. I'm expecting the moderate Republicans showing up in huge numbers because of Governor Larry Hogan, including independents and some soft Democrats. And, the answer to winning in November is that we have to appeal not just to the hardcore conservatives. You're not going to win with that. Not in District 6. It just can't happen. You're going to have them. You're going to have the Larry Hogan supporters, whether that's soft Republicans, independents, and soft Democrats. That coalition is a huge, victorious coalition, and I'm looking forward to working to make that happen. Now, look, I don't know who's going to win the U.S. Senate race in the primaries, but whoever does win, I'm going to be completely supporting them and working with them to try and make sure we have the U.S. Senate seat and we pick up this U.S. House seat.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting year. In a state where a lot of times, unfortunately, people don't really look at Maryland, we have 3 open congressional seats and an open Senate seat that obviously just became much, much more competitive. So it's a fascinating year and Trump and Hogan on the ballot at the same time. It's a fascinating year to be a Marylander.
It sure is. And it's going to be interesting to watch how that all unravels as we go towards November. The bottom line is, a lot of people who are listening to the show even, you're going to be probably a Trump person more or a Hogan person more. The bottom line is we need to bring forward the conservative values and the conservative message. How do we bring that forward the most? And the way to do it, we have to have Trump. He's got to beat Biden. And Biden, like we've talked about, his policies are horrific. They've gotten us in trouble internationally. We don't have our own energy. We have a border that's completely overrun. Our economy is in shambles. This is all Biden's fault. He's got to go.
And here's the other thing to those who may be detractors of Governor Hogan, but Neil, you and I are old enough to remember, Jackie wasn't even alive, but Maryland used to have 2 Republican senators, Mac Mathias and Jay Glenn Bell, and let me tell you, they were both very liberal, but Larry Hogan is not as liberal as they were,
Well, I don't.
Senator.
Obviously, we're not the ones being interviewed here, but I do want to take a second because there is a comment that popped up and I'll put it on the screen. And I do want to address this because it is something that we're seeing a lot that people are saying. And the catchphrase I'm telling people is I'd rather have a little R than a big D, because every Republican, no matter where on the spectrum of conservatism they fall, is one more Republican that gets us closer to the majority. So I'd rather have Larry Hogan than David Trump or any other
or Angela also Brooks,
Right.
Senator Hogan is better,
Right.
Because
it's better for the entire country to have a Republican win that seat.
Yeah.
So let's say in the primaries, we have a contest. So whoever's listening, vote your conscience in the primaries. Do your homework. Vote whoever you think is the best candidate to move forward. And whoever that is, we need to get behind them. Just like Jackie said, even if it's Larry Hogan, let's say that, for instance, he only votes with us 30% of the time, which I don't believe, by the way. It needs to be much higher than that. But let's say it's only 30% of the time. Well, at least we have the 30% vote. David Trone, I can guarantee you, will vote against us 100% of the time.
Yep.
I mean, the guy is corrupt. He's unethical. He lies. This is not someone that we want as a U.S. senator representing Maryland. And now we have a great chance to beat him. I'm really excited about it.
And it would be a chance, and I think we're obviously all making the assumption that Larry Hogan could win the race. So in this hypothetical situation, this would be a Larry Hogan who isn't being stifled by a Democrat supermajority legislature. So he has more of a chance to actually be a conservative without the hindrances of the vetoes coming in from the legislature, or the overrides from the legislature.
And furthermore, a Senator Hogan would not be nearly as bad as, say, some of our other rhino Republican senators we've had over the years. I think Neil and I are probably the only ones old enough here today to remember those very liberal Northeast Republicans like Jumping Jim Jeffords.
Oh, yeah. That's awful.
So, so tomorrow is the State of the Union. And I think everyone in the world is going to be watching to see how long Biden can go before he like keels
Falls
over,
asleep.
falls asleep on his feet. Or so. What are your predictions tomorrow? Do you think he's just going to spend the whole time taking pot shots at Trump, or is he actually going to try and articulate, or at least try to spin what he's done over the past 4 years as a successful first term?
I think anybody else would. Well, first of all, how could he spin anything? He's done a terrible job. He's probably going to get up there, and he's probably going to blame the Republicans for not shutting the border. I mean, the Republicans have nothing to do with it. Joe, it's your fault entirely. You own this, buddy. And he's trying to shift the blame. I mean, talk about gaslighting. I expect to hear that from him tomorrow night. To try and shift the blame to Republicans. You should have passed for 5,000 illegal aliens a day? No. He's going to try and whitewash everything. Oh, my administration was great. He used to brag about economics before people realized that it's awful. That when he took over, you have to have had a pay raise of $11,000 since 2021 just to break even, just for the cost of living. Most people.
The average grocery for Americans now is $1,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. That is $1,000 a month. That's more than a car payment. For the average American. That's money they're pulling out of the economy. And Joe Biden, what's he been doing? He's been blaming grocery stores, manufacturers,
They're all price gouging.
Shrinkflation, hey Joe, maybe if you wouldn't have screwed everything up.
Yeah, it's funny how he shift blaming. Tries to blame the corporations, tries to blame the Republicans. Look, Joe, it's your fault. You got us into this mess, and we need to get him out of office. That's what needs to happen.
So I probably asked you the question last cycle, but I asked it to all the candidates, and obviously things change every 2 years with who's in office. So which current member of Congress do you most identify as the type of member of Congress you would be?
That's interesting. Mike Johnson actually is somebody that I would identify with a great deal. It's funny, he is the Speaker of the House now, and if you asked me 2 years ago, which I know you did, I wouldn't have said him because I didn't even know who he was.
I didn't know who he was either.
But now we all know, and you know what? He wasn't braggadocious. He was just calmly doing his job and doing it well. And his colleagues all saw it, and they elevated him to this rank. And at first, we didn't know what to expect from Mike Johnson. Is he going to do okay? Is he a radical? We don't know. But what we're seeing is he's trying to work with all the factions of the Republican Party in the House, bring them together so they can have a common theme and try and do what's best for our country. That's the thing I want to be doing. It's what's best for our country, what's best for our district. How can we move things forward, and how can we work with others to make that happen?
And let me follow up with another policy type question. So as Congressman Parrott, China invades Taiwan. Would you vote for putting U.S. boots on the ground to defend Taiwan?
Well, I'll tell you what, we need to make sure that never, ever happens. And the way you do it is you have peace through strength. China needs to know that we're serious. China needs to know that Taiwan is serious and that they have the weapons to be able to defend against some kind of invasion of China. Look, China, they've got a huge army, much, much bigger than ours. They've been investing their money now for decades, stealing our technology. Actually, Bill Clinton gave them some of the technology, stealing it, building things that some of their things are better than ours. For instance, they have nuclear capability with a missile that doesn't go into outer space and come down like ours does. It just goes right above the top of the earth where we can't even hardly detect it. It can hit New York and we'd be blown up. We need to defend ourselves better against China. We need to show that we have strength. We have to have what they used to call under Ronald Reagan Star Wars. We need to be able to take out their weapons, and we need to work with other countries to make that happen. Look, that would be a disaster. I mean, in my whole life, I've thought that China is the world's menace. It's our biggest enemy. I don't know that we could beat China, to be honest. They would have the resolve. We may not. We just have to make sure this never happens.
Yeah. So as we get towards close-ish to the end of the show, is there anything else that are main policy points that you want to touch on, or main other things about your campaign that you want to mention?
Yeah, thank you for letting me be here. One other thing I do want to talk about is crime. we have to support the police. And this is an issue from 2 years ago. It's still there. We need to support the police. And unfortunately, Montgomery County, they just don't. And the state of Maryland, they pass laws that tie the policeman's hands literally behind their back. And they say you have to use the least amount of force possible. But first of all, what does that even mean? What it means is often policemen now are going to be like, you know what, you guys just fight it out, do what you need to do, and I'll come in and clean it up at the end. That's not what we want from the police force. We want them to come in proactively, break up some kind of fight, break up whatever's happening, and help us to be safe, help our families. And we can't do that by tying the hands of the policemen and passing terrible laws that make them personally liable for things that happen while they're trying to do their job. And we're seeing the results. In Montgomery County, carjackings have increased just since last year, about 30%. And then you look at actually auto thefts have increased by about 120%, again, just from last year. And I blame a lot of this on the politicians in Montgomery County that don't back the police. And, as a congressman, they don't have this now. They've got David Trone. But as a congressman, I can come in and help the police in Montgomery County, at least let them know that I care about them, that they're heard, and that we respect them like we need to respect them.
So, Neil, how can people find out more about you, your website, and give you some money if they want to donate money to your campaign?
Well, that would be a huge help. Right now, it's only a few weeks, really, before the primaries. They're going to start voting. So people can go to neilparrott.org. It's neilparrott.org. And look, we just announced about 3 weeks ago that I'm running for office. So we're still trying to get everything up and running. But it is getting there. And I really appreciate everyone who's watching. And if you could give a donation, even a small amount, that's going to be a huge, huge help as we reach out to voters to try and win this primary and then to take it to November to make sure that we have a flipped seat. And, we have to flip this seat. Right now, it's too close in the House of Representatives. We only have, it could be somewhere between a 2 and 5 member advantage over the Democrats. We need to have a much higher advantage to that. It looks to me, I'm pretty optimistic that Donald Trump's going to win as the president. I'm optimistic that the Republicans will take the U.S. Senate. But the House of Representatives is up for grabs, and that's one reason why I'm running. We cannot just afford to surrender this seat. We have to win the seat. And I'm looking forward to working with everybody who's listening. Even if it was somebody else in the primary, hopefully we come together afterwards, we win the seat this coming November.
And Dwight, I guess on your part, there's a lot of stuff going on with the club and around the state. So
yes, we've got March Madness going on with the club. Tomorrow night we have Bonnie Glick, businesswoman, diplomat. She will be speaking, kicking off Women's History Month. It should be called Republican Women's History Month because the Republican women that have made history, everything from the suffragette movement to the first elected Republican in Congress was a Republican woman. Then we've got the following week, we've got Pi Day, celebration of STEM, and we've got a great lady, Councilwoman Jessica Hare, will be speaking. She is also, not only is she just a councilwoman and an attorney, but she's also a civil engineer. And she'll be talking about STEM education and how STEM benefits everyone and how the left is trying to kill STEM education as well. And then on the 21st, we've got a Pizza and Politics Extra. We've got Maryland's Republican National Committee man, David Bossie. He will be speaking on everything 2024 elections, conventions, and everything in between. And then, we've got that. And then we've got coming up, we've got a lot of great guests lined up for Women's History Month to talk about that. Check out our website, MontgomeryCountyRepublicanClub.com. We've got some great articles that will be going up in the next couple of weeks about some legendary Republican women from Maryland. Today we had in our newsletter about overall Republican women, but we're going to be featuring some of our rock stars from Maryland, everyone from Marjorie Holt to Corinne Frank, to Liliana Ricks, Norcadis, actually. I butchered her name. Everyone knows who that is. About all the great things they're doing and moving the bar forward for Republican politics in Maryland.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So it's going to be an exciting month.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
So what are the YRs doing, Jackie?
what are the YRs? What are we not doing? We have several events that we're going to be announcing soon, but it's going to be our crab feast over the summer. It's going to be our first ever Day Press Memorial Day of Service coming up in June. We're going to be doing our Christmas Gala, which we're hoping to double in size from last year. And of course, our legislative summit, which we're going to be doing in Annapolis this year, sometime in November post-election, but people starting to pre-file for session. So we're always working. We've got 3 new chapters already in the process of getting chartered. And that's having also just launched our Washington County chapter.
And you just elected a great new president for the Montgomery County YRs.
Yes.
Matthew Foldy.
Yes, it's the return of Matthew Foldy.
Return of the king.
Yes, so lots going on in YR world.
Yeah, so are you getting a little hungry? I say let's drive over to Missoni's in Perry Hall, Maryland.
Yes, go get some pizza.
Yeah, and it's not just pizza. They got some great Italian food. They've got mozzarella caprese. I tell you, one of the best things they have is the spaghetti egg rolls. And it's really good. You wouldn't think it would taste good, but it actually doesn't taste bad. It's really good. And the ice cream made there on premises, the Missoni family recipe. You got to go there and get some. They do great, and and Greg and Chris are great people in your family when you go to Missoni's.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week. I think Mark will be back next week. We'll find out. I'll find out when you find out. So
we'll find out when he pops on the screen.
Join us next week to see if Mark is here or not. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.